The crisp sound of a perfect shot echoed throughout the Hawthorne Elite Shooters Club, followed by thunderous applause from the city's wealthy elite, all dressed in custom shooting gear and polished designer boots. Chase Whitmore lowered his custom Macmillan rifle, a smug grin spreading across his face as the electronic display flashed another perfect bullseye. This was his kingdom, a world where money, power, and finely honed skill created an impenetrable fortress, dividing the privileged few from the rest of the world. Amaya Lewis hesitated for a moment before the gleaming iron gate. Sunlight glistened in small halos on her navy cardigan, soft but completely out of place in the stifling luxury that surrounded her. Her worn jeans, scuffed sneakers, and old leather bag. Every detail on her was like a discordant note in this extravagant picture. Taking a deep breath, Amaya pulled open the gate. The soft creak of the hinges sounded like a sigh of the wind. Inside the club, the air was thick with the scent of gun oil, aged oak, and an invisible but suffocating odor, the arrogance of those accustomed to adulation. Custom-made shooting suits, gold-plated guns displayed in glass cabinets, prestigious plaques hanging along the walls. Everything screamed a single message. This is not a place for those not of our class. Amaya felt every gaze that passed over her, cold, dismissive, quickly turning away, as if her very presence sullied the pristine air of the room. She walked up to the reception desk where a blonde girl with a pre-programmed smile was stationed. The employee's eyes flicked briefly to Amaya's face before dropping, her gaze turning indifferent. "Hello," Amaya said softly, her voice like a fresh breeze in the heavy room. "I'm here for the open practice session today." The receptionist blinked, her voice cold as she replied, "We only accept official members." Amaya, unfazed, pulled out a slightly wrinkled envelope and withdrew a stamped invitation card from it. "Here, I have an invitation." Before the receptionist could respond, Chase Whitmore, dressed in an expensive shooting suit with a prominent Remington logo embroidered on his chest, turned his head from chatting with a few other influential figures. At 42, Chase was the epitome of Boston's elite. Meticulously styled brown hair, a smug smile as though the world had been made to roll out a red carpet at his feet. His eyes quickly scanned from the old invitation card in Amaya's hand to her faded sneakers, then curled into a smirk. His voice rang out clearly through the silence. "You're in the wrong place. Walmart's across the street." Laughter erupted from his group of friends, slicing through the air like invisible knives. A few strangers nearby chuckled softly, the kind of sneaky laugh shared by those who found joy in humiliating others. Amaya felt every eye on her, not a single look of goodwill, only cold glances, sarcastic smiles, and the invisible wall between them and her growing higher than ever. She stood tall, tightening the strap of her bag to keep her hands from shaking with the simmering anger rising within her. No arguing, no justifications. In her mind, Nathaniel's words echoed, "Never let them see you lose your composure. The world isn't kind, Amaya. You have to be as solid as a rock." Amaya nodded politely to the receptionist, still holding the invitation tightly, and quietly walked toward the general practice area, a corner reserved for those who didn't belong to this world of wealth, kept out of sight to avoid tarnishing the brand image. Behind her, the mocking laughter continued to buzz like a disturbed beehive. But Amaya never looked back. Not once. Amaya continued walking, her worn sneakers making soft taps against the glossy wooden floor, each step a silent declaration in the space thick with prejudice. No one stopped her, but the eyes that followed felt like dull knives, slowly cutting at her self-respect. In the open practice area, a row of simple shooting benches lined the wall, completely separated from the high-end shooting lanes where members often flaunted their expensive guns and flashy techniques. Amaya chose a spot at the far end where she'd be least noticed, quietly placing her bag on the wooden shelf. She calmly retrieved her Glock 19, not a golden-plated weapon, nor a gun engraved with shining names like the wealthy members, but a simple, practical firearm that had been her constant companion through the years of her past. Just as she was finishing her preparations, the heavy sound of footsteps approached from behind, deliberate and hurried, as if announcing someone's presence. Chase Whitmore, with his smug, self-satisfied grin, and a few friends, men clad in expensive shooting gear and wearing the arrogant confidence of those accustomed to winning, came closer. The light from the halogen lamps fell at an angle on his shoulder, casting a long, harsh shadow like a warning. Chase stopped right beside Amaya's shooting bench, folding his arms across his chest, his cold blue eyes looking at her as if she were a strange creature that had wandered into his territory. "Are you sure you know where you are?" Chase began, his voice low but loud enough for those around to hear, the drawn-out tone deliberately emphasizing his disdain. "This isn't a class for those who just got their gun license, sweetheart." Amaya looked up, her deep brown eyes meeting his gaze, calm and steady, not challenging, not retaliating, just a quiet stillness, like the surface of a lake before a storm. That calmness, strangely, caused Chase to falter for a brief moment. He recovered almost instantly, scoffing with a laugh before raising his voice so the whole room could hear, 10,000, sweetheart. If you can hit a bullseye from 50 yards on your first shot, I'll pay. If not..." He shrugged, a casual gesture filled with challenge. "Then you'd better get out of here and never come back to spoil the air at Hawthorne." A wave of mocking laughter spread from his friends, mixed with the satisfied chuckles of a few bystanders who were also looking for a quick form of entertainment on this lazy afternoon. The name Chase Whitmore wasn't just any name in Boston. He was the son of a powerful oil family, a 5-time national champion, an Olympic gold medalist, and the face of multiple renowned weapon manufacturers. With his polished exterior and illustrious record, Chase was used to others fearing or admiring him. In his world, the appearance of a simple black girl in an old cardigan, daring to step into this elite domain without bowing or avoiding, it was an unforgivable insult. Amaya tightened the strap of her bag, feeling the warmth of the invitation card pressed against her palm. The laughter around her seemed to fade, pushed aside by the steady beat of her heart, each beat like a silent drum leading the way. A part of her wanted to retreat, to walk away, to avoid the prying eyes and the storm about to break. But deep inside, a memory stirred, a memory of Nathaniel, of those sunlit afternoons at the old range in Virginia Beach, where he'd guided her hand to adjust every small motion. No matter what they think, just remember, you, the target, and your breath. Nothing else matters. Amaya took a slow breath, relaxed her shoulders, and turned to face Chase. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she scoff in return as he might have expected. She simply nodded, composed. "All right," she said, her voice warm and steady, like the click of a gun's chamber in the silence. That calmness, instead of satisfying Chase's need for entertainment, unknowingly planted a seed of unease in him. The unsettling feeling that a prey that should be trembling stood still, waiting, as if it were the hunter. But Chase, too caught up in his own arrogance, didn't notice. He laughed loudly, turning to his friends and patting one of them holding a betting book on the back. "Watch this, guys, a $10 fun bet. This'll be worth every penny." Around them, the whispers, the mocking glances, and the snickering continued to blossom. No one knew, no one saw, that the real storm, Not the one of humiliation that Amaya would endure, but the one that would tear apart their pride, was silently building inside this simple black girl. Amaya placed the Glock on the shooting bench, her fingers gently gliding over the cold, textured surface, tracing the familiar contours as if touching a part of a memory that had been engraved in her very soul. She paid no attention to the mocking laughter or the derisive glances around her, for in that moment she was hearing another sound, deeper, more profound, the whisper from a past that no one here knew. 3 years ago, beneath the leaden gray sky of a dreary April day, Amaya Lewis stood before a cold headstone at Arlington National Cemetery, her hands tightly clutching the neatly folded triangle flag, heavy as if carrying the shattered heart within her. Master Chief Nathaniel Lewis, her husband, her teacher, and her sole protector, had been buried with full military honors, the ceremonial gunshots ripping through the air, the eulogies whispered like a fine mist. They called him the Ghost, a name the military reserved for legendary snipers, those who could strike a target from distances that ordinary people couldn't even see. For 15 years, Nathaniel served in SEAL Team 6, carrying out missions so classified that their files were sealed forever, where only loyalty and unparalleled skill could ensure survival. But few knew that behind the cold exterior and sharpshooter's precision, there was a devoted husband, a man haunted by a quiet fear that one day he might not return. And that fear had driven Nathaniel to train Amaya in secret, beginning with simple shooting sessions at an old range on the outskirts of Virginia Beach. At first, Amaya thought it was just a means of self-defense, a way to protect herself during Nathaniel's long absences. But over time, she realized those sessions weren't just about training. They were Nathaniel's way of imparting to her the survival mindset, lessons about controlling her breath amidst a storm of bullets, about keeping her sight steady when everything around her was shaking, and about how not to let fear tear apart her rational mind. A true marksman isn't the fastest or the strongest, Nathaniel had whispered, adjusting her shooting posture, his hand warm yet firm. It's the one who keeps the coldest head, the most stable heart, even when the whole world is crashing down around them. Amaya, then still innocent in her love, didn't fully grasp the depth of his words. It wasn't until a phone call late one night, when the cold voice from Special Operations Command confirmed the worst news, that she understood. Nathaniel had prepared her, not just to survive, but to stand firm when loss was inevitable. Nathaniel's death had been a helicopter crash during a covert mission. The report was brief and cold, but Amaya knew the truth was far deeper, that the most important things, the greatest sacrifices, would forever be buried in the shadows of unnamed operations. Since that day, Amaya had never touched a gun again. She locked the Glock securely in a safe, moved to Boston, buried herself in the mundane world of accounting, and avoided all memories of a world she had once been trained to survive in. That was, until a week ago, when a small, nameless envelope slid under the door of her old apartment. Inside was a club invitation to the Elite Shooters Club and a small note, written in hurried, scrawled handwriting. Nathaniel wanted you to continue. It's been long enough. It's time to step out of the shadows. DW? Amaya didn't need to ask who DW was. She knew. Commander Derek Wilson, an old friend of Nathaniel's, the man who sometimes sent her Christmas cards with no message other than a solemn X. And that was why today she stood here, in this cauldron of scorn and prejudice, facing a man like Chase Whitmore, who saw nothing but a simple black girl with worn-out shoes and thought he was staring at an easy target. Chase, meanwhile, was busy rallying the crowd around him, boasting about the easiest bet of his life, his eyes gleaming with malicious excitement. He had no idea that standing before him wasn't just any ordinary girl, She was someone taught by a ghost how to stand firm in the storm. Chase Whitmore continued loudly, boasting to the crowd gathered around him, eagerly displaying a victory that hadn't happened yet, as if it were already a certainty. His hand waved dramatically, the light from his expensive Rolex watch flashing in the air, reflecting his unabashed smugness. But at the far end of the shooting range, Amaya Lewis was different. She stood there, quietly, her feet planted firmly on the wooden floor, shoulders relaxed, her posture perfectly balanced, as if she no longer belonged to the commotion happening behind her. Her hands lifted the Glock 19, her fingers moving with the precision of years of training, every motion deliberate and flawless. The old gun seemed to come alive in her hands, becoming an extension of her body, an extension of her breath. Amaya adjusted her aim, her eyes narrowing not from pressure or tension, but from absolute focus, a focus that had been honed through countless golden afternoons at the range with Nathaniel, amidst simple yet deeply ingrained lessons. As her breath stabilized on the third exhale, the world around her seemed to shrink down to 3 singular points. Her, the gun, and the target. Not the mocking laughter, not the whispered insults, not the arrogant shadow of Chase or anyone else in the gilded room. Only Amaya and the tiny red circle of the bullseye, 50 yards away. Her finger gently squeezed the trigger, like an unspoken whisper sent to a distant place. And the bullet tore through the air, in the temporary silence she had created for herself. The shot rang out, sharp and clean, like a decisive cut that sliced through the thick air of prejudice. Every movement in the shooting room froze in a single breath. The target retrieval system hummed with a whir as the target was pulled back, the mechanical sound echoing, stretching the waiting moment into a taut, suffocating string of tension. Some people held their breath. Others squinted, waiting for the ridiculous moment they were sure would come, ready to burst into gleeful laughter. But when the target drew near, all murmurs seemed to be choked off in their throats. A single, sharp bullet hole, perfectly placed right at the center of the red bullseye. Not a fraction off. Not by chance, no mistake. The room went silent, not out of respect, but out of shock. Chase Whitmore, who had so recently been certain of victory, stood frozen. His lips moved as if trying to find an excuse, but no sound came out. His tanned face, once familiar with a victorious grin, now turned pale, as if he himself had been the one hit. One of Chase's friends, unable to control his reaction, blurted out, "What the hell?" The sound of a hidden camera shutter from someone in the crowd rang out, faint but sharp in the heavy silence that enveloped the room. Amaya lowered the Glock, gently placing it back on the shooting bench as if she had just completed a normal task. Her face showed no trace of victory or pride, only calm, certainty, as if the shot wasn't to satisfy her ego, but to fulfill a promise far more sacred than any recognition. Her gaze swept across the room, meeting countless stunned, bewildered eyes, before finally resting on Chase, still staggering from the shock. No words were spoken by Amaya. She didn't need to. The shot had already said everything for her. In the heavy silence following the first shot, where every breath seemed to echo against the luxurious wood-paneled walls, Chase Whitmore stood as if struck by an invisible punch directly to his pride. He froze in place, his smug smile now just a cracked, distorted line on a face that had always been carefully crafted for public perfection. Chase curled his lips, trying to force out a scornful laugh, but his voice had lost the usual confident resonance. "Just a lucky shot," he gritted, his eyes suddenly sharp, like a freshly sharpened blade. "Everyone has their lucky moments." The friends standing around him, The ones who had laughed mockingly at Amaya now fell silent, no one daring to mock her further. The air around Chase became thick, as if even he could smell the danger that his own arrogance had inadvertently stirred. Refusing to lose face, Chase took another step forward, his shadow stretching long across Amaya's shooting bench. "All right, then," he said, his voice now deeper, more venomous, like a gambler ready to stake everything on the final hand. "If you think you're that good," he paused, glancing quickly at the crowd who had turned their eyes on them, "I'll bet $50,000 that you can't do it again." Amaya looked up, the halogen light casting shadows from her long lashes onto her cheek, creating a soft glow that held no trace of weakness. "3 shots," Chase continued, each word like a hammer striking the wooden floor. 3 bullseyes in a row, from 75 yards. If you do it, I'll pay. If not—" He smiled, the smile flat and distant, not reaching his eyes. "Then you leave, and never come back." A murmur spread through the room. The $50,000, a huge sum, even for the high rollers at Hawthorne, made many in the crowd lean forward, eyes gleaming with eager anticipation, as if they were about to witness a life-or-death showdown between David and Goliath. Amaya glanced at the crowd, the expensive suits, the sleek hairstyles, the eyes full of expectation, hoping for a slip, a moment of humiliation to give them another reason to laugh and degrade her. But she didn't feel fear. She only felt a profound stillness, like the day Nathaniel had first taken her to the range, when she had been clumsy and awkward, and he had quietly said, "True victory isn't about beating your opponent. It's about not letting your opponent defeat you from within." Amaya adjusted her cardigan's sleeve, a small but decisive gesture, then replied in a voice as calm as still water. "All right," she said, "but I have one condition." Chase narrowed his eyes, cautious. "If I win," Amaya continued, her eyes glowing with an unusual warmth amidst the tense air, "the money will be donated in full to the Veterans Support Foundation." A new wave of whispers spread across the room. That name, a foundation well known in military and veteran circles, made some faces in the crowd pause. Not out of compassion, but because of the sensitivity surrounding patriotic values, which were always a double-edged sword in any high-honor environment like Hawthorne. Chase hesitated for a moment. He understood. Refusing the request would make him look like a coward in the eyes of the crowd. But agreeing meant that if he lost, he would not only lose money but also his carefully crafted image, defeated by an anonymous black woman, right in the heart of Boston's elite sanctuary. In the end, his foolish pride, nurtured for so long, won. Chase clapped his hands together, the sound dry, like the click of a trap being sprung. "All right," he nodded, a forced smile spreading across his face. "Let's see if you can pull off another miracle." All eyes in the room were now on Amaya. No more mocking laughter, no more whispering insults. Only waiting, thick and heavy like the air before a great storm. Amaya gently took the Glock back in hand, tightening her grip, her breathing slow and rhythmic, like an ancient song that only she could hear. In her mind, she whispered to Nathaniel, "This is for you, and for everyone who's ever been looked down upon just because they didn't fit some mold." Then, with a smooth but sure movement, Amaya stepped out from the shadow the world had tried to cast over her, moving forward toward the challenge that awaited. Amaya tightened her grip on the gun, feeling the familiar textured polymer surface cold against her calloused fingertips. The atmosphere in the shooting range had shifted completely, no longer filled with the mocking laughter that greeted her upon arrival, but a heavy, suffocating silence, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite into a tremor. From her position, she looked up at the target, now set at a distance of 75 yards, 1.5 times further than her previous shot. The concentric circles were so small they almost appeared as nothing more than a faint black dot on the white target. For someone who had never undergone specialized training, hitting accurately at this distance would seem almost impossible. But for Amaya, this was not just a test of skill. It was a reminder of everything she had endured. The long nights alone with the Glock, practicing her breathing while the wind howled through the old window frame. The months Nathaniel spent patiently correcting her stance, adjusting her trigger pull with his scarred hands. Chase Whitmore stood not far away, his hands stuffed into his pockets, his face contorting into a forced, indifferent smile. But his eyes, the cold light that was usually constant, now betrayed a flicker of unease. He knew Amaya's first shot hadn't been a fluke. He had seen her stance, the absolute control she exhibited, the kind that even professional marksmen took years to achieve. But Chase was the kind of man who would rather burn his own pride than admit that someone like Amaya, someone he had deemed not belonging to this world, might truly be better than him. A brief beep sounded from the electronic control panel, signaling that the range was now safe to shoot. All eyes in the room seemed to fixate on Amaya, the simple black girl, wearing a faded green cardigan, standing alone against the vast distance and the invisible weight of countless scrutinizing gazes. Amaya closed her eyes for a brief breath, feeling the smooth surface of the trigger under her index finger. In her mind, there was no sound except for the steady beating of her heart, the rhythmic breathing Nathaniel had taught her to regulate like a soundtrack for each squeeze of the trigger. Then she opened her eyes. A seamless motion, practiced, almost invisible in its tension. The Glock aimed squarely at the target, her wrist steady, elbow slightly bent, shoulders relaxed. She exhaled halfway, just like the countless times before, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, crisp and sharp, echoing through the room like a defiant answer to all who had doubted her. The target wavered slightly, but the retrieval system began to pull it back. The whir of the machinery stretched the moment of waiting into taut, suffocating tension. Chase squinted, his whole body tight like a wire, ready to snap. His friends around him, who had been clapping him on the back and laughing, now stood completely still, clutching the edges of their chairs or pretending to busy themselves with their phones. The target stopped in front of the shooting bench. A single, clean, neat hole in the exact center of the bullseye. Not a fraction off. No sign of error. Amaya didn't change her expression. She simply calmly reloaded, adjusted her stance, and prepared for the second shot. Chase clenched his fists in his pockets, his fingers digging into the expensive fabric until his knuckles turned white. But in front of the crowd that was now fixated on the range, he had to suppress the boiling anger in his chest and force a strained smile. Amaya didn't notice. She didn't need to. She focused only on the lesson Nathaniel had etched into her. Shooting is control. Control of the body, the breath, and above all, control of the mind. The second time, she exhaled halfway and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out again, slicing through the tense silence. The second target, when pulled back, revealed another bullet hole directly in the center of the bullseye. Perfect, sharp, irrefutable. The room trembled. At this point, even the whispers stopped. Some of the veteran members of the club, who were accustomed to witnessing the finest shots, shook their heads in quiet admiration. Chase swallowed hard, cold sweat beginning to bead down the back of his neck. He knew, no matter how the third shot turned out, no matter what excuses he could come up with, His standing at Hawthorne, the pride he had built for so many years, had already begun to waver. Amaya moved slowly, steadily, like a musician playing the final note of a symphony. The Glock sat firmly in her hand, as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. She took another deep breath, exhaled, and shot. The sound of the gun this time didn't startle anyone. They all just held their breath, waiting. The final target slowly drifted back. The target appeared before everyone with a bullet hole directly in the center of the bullseye, perfect and irrefutable, just like the previous two. 3 shots, 3 bullseyes, consecutively, no mistakes, no hesitation. An absolute victory. A wave of silence washed over the room like a blanket submerged in gravity. Chase Whitmore, his face pale, stammered silently. His body seemed to want to vanish from the earth, looking for a place to escape from the eyes now turning from admiration to doubt and contempt. No way. He stammered, his voice rising in panic. You cheated. This can't be. What are you doing? Amaya stood still, her gaze as calm as a winter lake, not even responding to his frantic words. At that moment, Rebecca Collins, the manager of Hawthorne, stepped into the shooting area, the cold clack of her low-heeled shoes echoing sharply on the marble floor. With a decisive movement, Rebecca picked up the 3 bullet-riddled targets, inspecting each shot under the cold white light. When she looked up, Rebecca's face, always cool and professional, finally cracked a slight smile, a quiet acknowledgement. She spoke, her voice ringing through the silence. 3 bullseyes, all perfectly valid, no sign of cheating, no technical errors. Chase Whitmore staggered back, as if punched in the chest. His face was white, his lips trembling with anger and humiliation. Amaya stood there, not smug, not arrogant, only with the terrifying stillness of someone who had long since learned to face the storm, knowing that true victory does not need applause. The shooting room still held the lingering echoes of Amaya's 3 bullseyes, as if those bullets hadn't just pierced through the target, but had also broken through the wall of pride that Chase Whitmore had spent years building around himself. Chase stood motionless, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. For a brief moment his face, once carefully groomed before each match, each lavish party, showed a mix of confusion, anger, and fear. The crowd that once surrounded him like satellites around the sun now gradually pulled away, leaving him alone in the empty circle of humiliation. Amaya remained standing there, silently, as if she were already accustomed to isolation, to the weight of the crowd's gaze bearing down on her without lowering her head. She placed the Glock on the bench, her hands still steady, her gaze unwavering, as firm as it had been the first time she stepped through the doors of the Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club. It was that calmness, more than the 3 perfect shots, that struck the deepest wound into Chase's pride. He took a step forward, slow but determined, each footfall seeming to pound the floor with the weight of his wounded arrogance. "You're good," Chase said, his voice hoarse, deeper than usual, but still attempting to reclaim a shred of his last dignity. "But a few lucky shots don't make you a professional marksman." Amaya looked at him, but didn't reply. He gritted his teeth, then turned to face the crowd, his voice suddenly rising, louder and more forceful, as if standing on a stage. "Then," he declared, raising his hand high, "I challenge her to an official competition. 10 shooting stations, 10 different weapons. Fair conditions with weapons provided by the club, standardized rules. Let's all see, between luck and real skill, who will be the winner." A wave of whispers spread through the room like a ripple of water. Some people frowned, sensing the atmosphere shifting from a spectacle to a real fight. The faces that had once been smug now showed signs of doubt, anxiety, but no one dared to intervene. Everyone understood that Chase, with his status and power at Hawthorne, could not afford to lose in public without pushing back. Rebecca Collins, the club manager, took a step forward, about to speak up. But the cold glare that Chase shot at her stopped her in her tracks. The cruelty hidden beneath his polished exterior was now fully visible. The raw instinct of someone born to dominate, ready to crush anyone who dared challenge his position. Amaya stood there, looking up at Chase, her gaze calm like a stormy sky about to break. She could feel the pressure swirling around her. The pressure from the crowd, from the context, from expectations, from the quiet whispers inside her. Part of her wanted to turn away. She hadn't come to Hawthorne to seek glory, not to fight against a system designed to exclude people like her. Nathaniel had once said, "Not every battle is worth fighting. Knowing when to walk away is a form of victory." But inside Amaya, another voice rang out, her own voice, strong, unyielding. "I don't fight for fame. I fight for all the times people thought I didn't deserve it." And above all, she remembered how Nathaniel had placed his hand on her heart and said, "Keep standing strong, Amaya, even when the whole world turns its back." She took a deep breath, holding it for a long beat in her chest, which tightened with the weight of the choice. Then she took a step forward, facing Chase, facing the entire room that was holding its breath waiting for her response. "All right," Amaya said, her voice not loud, but resonant and as solid as rock. "I accept." The room exploded into whispers, the clicking of cameras from a few journalists who had already arrived, flashes of light like lightning signaling a media storm taking shape. Chase pressed his lips together, hiding the smug grin that had almost emerged. He believed that no matter how skilled Amaya was, she would never match him on a real playing field. He had been trained with the finest weapons, coached by the most renowned marksmen since childhood, while she, a nameless black girl with no family background, no fame, was just a temporary phenomenon. And Chase silently vowed that he would crush her, not only to restore his reputation but also to send a clear message to anyone who dared dream of stepping into his world. Rebecca Collins stepped forward, paper and pen ready in hand. "We'll set up the standard shooting stations," she announced. 10 different weapons, handguns, large-caliber pistols, shotguns, assault rifles, sniper rifles, and custom variants. The distance and difficulty will increase with each station. She glanced quickly at Amaya, her eyes silently offering a warning. Amaya simply nodded. "Any other conditions?" Rebecca asked. Chase immediately interjected. "Simple conditions," he said. "No personal weapons. Everything provided by the club, no trainers or coaching, no complaints after each station, and especially," he looked Amaya up and down, his voice harsh, "whoever loses will have to publicly admit defeat right here in front of everyone." Rebecca took note carefully, then looked at Amaya. She didn't hesitate. "Agreed," Amaya responded, each word as firm as nails. Her calmness made Chase frown for a brief moment. He expected her to hesitate, to show a worried glance or a forced smile. But all he saw was cold, unshakable determination, a composure so terrifying that even many professional marksmen couldn't maintain it under pressure. And in that brief moment, Chase Whitmore, who had once stood on the pedestal of glory, accustomed to being looked up to, suddenly felt a chill creeping up from his spine to the top of his head, a feeling he dared not admit. A vague fear that this time he had awakened something he couldn't easily defeat. As the noise from the challenge slowly died down, and the crowd began to disperse, Chase Whitmore remained standing in place, his cold, sharp gaze following the figure of Amaya Lewis disappearing down the hallway leading to the guest area. Outside, he still wore the faint smile of a gentleman who had just accepted a risky game, but inside, his anger simmered, boiling like magma beneath a frozen surface. Chase knew better than anyone. He had lost control the moment Amaya refused to back down under pressure, and he understood more than ever that to retain the crown he had worn for the past 10 years at Hawthorne, he would have to do more than just shoot well. He had to eliminate her, at any cost. Chase picked up the phone, dialing a familiar number with a steady hand, his voice low and rasping through clenched teeth. "Jack, I need you to do something." On the other end of the line, a dry chuckle echoed. Jack Madison, the famous private investigator known in Boston's elite circles for handling the jobs that the prestigious families preferred not to get involved in. "Dig up everything you can about Amaya Lewis," Chase ordered, each word deliberate, sharp like a finely honed blade. "Her past, her family, her job, anyone she's ever been close to. I want everything, and I want it soon." "How much are we talking? You know the drill," Jack replied, his voice tinged with amusement. "Money's not an issue," Chase interrupted. "I need something that can turn the tables on her before the official competition." He hung up the phone before Jack could respond, standing still for a moment, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles cracked. Chase Whitmore, the man who had never allowed anyone to publicly challenge him without paying the price, had officially entered a battle he knew he couldn't win with just guns alone. He needed an advantage. He needed to manipulate the playing field in a way that honest marksmen would never even think of. That very night, in the Hawthorne boardroom, Chase sat across from 3 key members, older men with the outward appearance of refined gentlemen, but who were filled with compromise and calculation on the inside. "We need to protect the club's reputation," Chase began, his voice tinged with a mix of feigned concern and underlying anger. "Today's incident, she, has damaged our credibility with the media." One of the men, Thomas Abernathy, a senior board member, squinted at him. "What do you mean, Chase?" "She competed fairly." Chase sneered, leaning forward, lowering his voice as though revealing a world-shattering secret. "You all know I grew up in this world. I can smell the problem from the way she shoots. This isn't the technique of an amateur. There's something off." A calculating silence stretched between the walnut-paneled walls. Chase continued, moving carefully step by step, like an experienced chess player. "My proposal is simple. To ensure fairness and maintain the club's standards, we'll change the competition conditions." He leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming. "Instead of shooting just one type of weapon, each station will use a different one. No personal gear allowed, and—" He paused, glancing quickly over the frowning faces. "We can adjust the weapons provided. Of course, within the technical limits." Thomas Abernathy crossed his arms, his voice tinged with suspicion. "Adjust?" "Just minor tweaks," Chase whispered, as if pouring honey into their ears. "A few changes in trigger weight, sight adjustments, or loading sensitivity. Nothing overt, but enough to challenge someone without deep experience with different kinds of weapons." A momentary hesitation passed across Thomas's face and those of the other board members, but then the name Whitmore, along with the massive funding his family had poured into Hawthorne over the years, quickly tipped the scales. Finally, Thomas gave a slight nod. "All right, for the good of the club." Chase smiled, a cold smile that slid like a blade across the silk. As he left the boardroom, he paused in the hallway, pulling out his phone and quickly typing a short message to Jack Madison. Speed things up. I want a full profile on her before the competition, and find a way, any way, to set a trap." He pocketed the phone, adjusted his cuff, and slowly walked away, each step deliberate, like a king surveying his territory, ready to crush any challenger. Chase Whitmore believed that with power, money, and the schemes hidden in the shadows, he would bring Amaya Lewis back to where he thought she belonged, beneath his feet. But what Chase didn't realize was this: there are people who, once they've learned how to survive in the dark, no longer fear anything. And Amaya Lewis, with all the loss and resilience forged in blood and tears, was no longer a girl who could be easily knocked down by such dirty tricks. Outside the Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club, the night in Boston hung heavy like a submerged net, swallowing up the plots and schemes that had just quietly begun within the luxurious oak walls. But as Chase Whitmore stepped into the darkness, certain that his scheme was now set in motion, on the other side of the city, Amaya Lewis was quietly preparing for another battle. A battle not just of skill, but of heart and memories that would never fade. The following morning, instead of heading to her office as she had done for the past 3 years, Amaya took the day off, quietly leaving the bustling downtown streets and driving toward the suburbs, where concrete walls gave way to vast fields, and lone power poles cast their shadows on cracked asphalt roads. Her destination was Old Dominion Range, a secluded shooting range that had once served as an unofficial training ground for some special forces units during the peak of covert operations overseas. A place forgotten by those who preferred glamour, but a silent sanctuary for those who needed to train in the dark, far from the judging eyes of the world. The car stopped on the dusty red earth. Amaya stepped out, wearing a faded denim jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. She stood still for a moment, quietly inhaling the smell of damp earth and old gunpowder still lingering in the wind, a familiar scent, evoking memories of days spent with Nathaniel. At that moment, from the old operations building, a tall figure walked toward her. His worn military uniform, his steady stride, his sharp eyes, the eyes of a man who had faced death too many times. Commander Derek Wilson. Amaya recognized him immediately, even though they had only met a few times briefly, hurried meetings, silent nods exchanged between those who understood the cost of loss. He was an old friend of Nathaniel's, a brother in every sense of the word, in a world where loyalty was valued above life itself. "Mrs. Lewis," Wilson greeted her, his voice deep and gravelly like stone. Nathaniel spoke often of you. Amaya tightened the strap of her sports bag, in which rested her faithful Glock 19 and a special gift, Nathaniel's tactical notebook, carefully filled with notes over the years. A treasured trove of knowledge on long-range shooting, sight adjustments, environmental control, and, above all, the skill to win through quiet perseverance. She gave a slight nod in reply. Wilson led her inside the range, where steel targets were set hundreds of yards apart, amidst the wind-swept fields. "Chase Whitmore isn't just playing a game of chance," Wilson said as they walked past the line of targets. "I've heard rumors that he's adjusted the rules, slight changes to the weapons, technical traps. Each station is a different challenge. If you only rely on your Glock, you'll be swallowed whole." Amaya wasn't surprised. She had seen the dangerous gleam in Chase's eyes the moment he realized she wasn't an easy prey. "I didn't come here to complain," Amaya said, her voice as steady as the earth beneath her feet. "I came here to adapt." Wilson smiled briefly, nodding as if confirming the spirit Nathaniel had always spoken of with pride. "All right, let's begin." In the following days, Amaya threw herself into training with an intensity that perhaps even she didn't realize she had left in her. In the mornings, she practiced with handguns, from the basic Glock to Berettas, Sig Sauers, and Smith & Wessons, each with its own weight, trigger force, and balance. She learned to adjust herself in just a few seconds, identifying each weapon's characteristics through the feel in her palm. In the afternoon, she moved on to assault rifles, from the standard AR-15 to custom versions fitted with scopes, collapsible stocks, and automatic fire selectors, each variant a puzzle to solve on the spot, under pressure. In the evenings, when the sunset bathed the fields in a golden hue and the wind began to howl like an eerie wail, she trained with sniper rifles, the Remington 700, the heavy Barrett M82, and especially the McMillan TAC-338, the very weapon that Chase favored, a gun with range and precision that demanded absolute perfection in every breath. Wilson stood nearby, watching silently, occasionally adjusting her stance or offering small tips Nathaniel had used to help her overcome the toughest drills. "Remember this," Wilson's voice was grave, as they took a break under the shade of an old oak tree. "Weapons can change. Conditions can change. But the person holding the gun, that is the real weapon." Amaya nodded, opening Nathaniel's old notebook, flipping to the pages where he had meticulously noted how to adjust shooting distance according to wind, how to read wind patterns from the sway of grass, how to gauge humidity in the air and recalculate bullet trajectories. Each page was a whisper from the past, a gentle touch of the man she loved on her shoulder, reminding her that she was never alone. The more she trained, the more Amaya felt her body change, not just in muscle or reflexes, but in the return of an old instinct, the instinct for survival, the instinct to stand firm amidst chaos, the instinct to cling to calm like the only lifeline in a stormy sea. On the fourth night, when the sun had set beyond the horizon and the insects' chorus merged with the wind's haunting sound, Amaya fired a series of 10 shots with the McMillan TAC-338 at a distance of 900 yards, and all of them hit the bullseye or were near perfect. Wilson gave her a light tap on the shoulder, his gaze rare, with unmasked admiration. "You're ready," he said, no longer calling her Mrs. Lewis. "He won't break you with weapons. He won't break you with dirty tricks. He won't break you with fear." Amaya only smiled, tightening the notebook to her chest. She knew the battle at Hawthorne hadn't yet begun. The real storm still waited ahead. But this time, she would not enter it for Nathaniel's promise alone. She would enter it for herself. For all the times she was looked down upon, ignored, underestimated, and because this time she would not lower her head. As the first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the old oak trees, rustling in the breeze, Amaya Lewis was ready. She stood before the mirror, adjusting her simple navy blue shirt, dark jeans, and worn sneakers. An outfit that drew no attention, but clung to her like an invisible suit of armor. No flashy jewelry, no signs of glamour, just calm, deeply embedded in every breath, in every heartbeat. She glanced at the old notebook placed on the table, its leather cover frayed at the edges, pages filled with Nathaniel's handwriting. Like a whisper from the past, reminding her why she was here, why she couldn't afford to hesitate. Amaya gently touched the cover of the notebook, a quick gesture like a silent ritual before slipping it into her bag. Today she would fight. Not for a medal, not for money, but for honor. For all the times she had been pushed aside simply because she didn't fit the molds others had drawn for her. By the time Amaya arrived at the Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club, the atmosphere was completely different from the first time she had walked through those doors. The area in front of the main entrance was decorated like a national sporting event. Banners with logos of famous weapon brands fluttered in the wind. Sponsorship booths displayed a range of expensive products, from custom shooting jackets to rifles worth as much as a car. The press had gathered in full force, cameras clicking incessantly, reporters with microphones bearing the logos of sports and military networks constantly filming, interviewing guests, and snapping photos of the vibrant atmosphere. At the center of all the attention, like a spotlight drawing every gaze, was Chase Whitmore. He appeared in his custom shooting uniform, a white polo shirt embroidered with the Hawthorne logo on the left chest, tight black athletic pants, and shiny titanium-framed sunglasses. His eyes gleamed with arrogant confidence as he smiled at reporters, shook hands with major sponsors, and pulled Jessica Monroe, a famous model and influencer in Boston's sports fashion world, close to his side. Jessica, with her glossy blonde hair and radiant smile, linked arms with Chase, an unspoken declaration that not only was he a champion, but also a public figure, an unshakable symbol of success. But deep inside that glossy exterior, Chase still felt something unsettled, a subtle chill running down his spine whenever he glanced toward the shooting range, where Amaya stood alone. She had no crowd around her, no reporters interviewing her, no PR team polishing her image, only her, solitary, determined, and calm, like an arrow already drawn to the bow. Rebecca Collins, the club manager, quickly weaved through the crowd, making her way toward Amaya. "Miss Lewis," she lowered her voice, her eyes quickly scanning around as if afraid someone might overhear. "I need to tell you something important." Amaya turned around, her steady brown eyes flashing with calm, making Rebecca hesitate for a moment. "There have been adjustments," Rebecca whispered, her lips pressed tight. "Some of the weapons in today's competition, heavier triggers, slightly misaligned scopes. Hard to detect, but I know, and—" She hesitated, then continued. "I believe that's not a coincidence." Amaya tilted her head slightly, a slow smile forming on her lips, showing no surprise. "I've prepared for the worst," she responded, her voice gentle, yet carrying the strength of a quiet force beneath. Rebecca watched her for a moment, then nodded silently and stepped back into the crowd, leaving Amaya to face the challenge ahead. In the competition area, the shooting stations had been set up. 10 different shooting platforms, each representing a different type of weapon. A massive electronic board displayed the rules, 10 stations, 10 different types of weapons. Each station with its own unique challenge. No breaks between stations, no personal firearms allowed. Each weapon had been fine-tuned as Chase had planned, subtle changes enough to throw off anyone unfamiliar and disrupt their natural reflexes. For someone used to only one weapon, it would be a real nightmare. But for Amaya, who had spent the last week training with various types and situations, it was just another test of perseverance. She took a deep breath, her hand lightly brushing the edge of her bag, feeling the solid presence of Nathaniel's notebook within, a silent reminder that she was ready. The head referee stepped up to the podium, the microphone booming across the field. "Welcome, everyone, to today's Hawthorne Invitational Elite match. We will witness a unique competition. Chase Whitmore, our undisputed champion, facing off against a newcomer who shocked us all last week, Amaya Lewis." A round of applause erupted, mostly for Chase, but in a distant corner, where a few veterans in gray shirts sat silently, there were quiet nods directed toward Amaya. Michael Reeves, Commander Derek Wilson, and a few familiar faces from the SEAL team sat there. No loud cheers, no noisy support, just quiet backing that was stronger than any applause. Amaya saw them, and she smiled. She knew in this battle she was no longer fighting alone. When the starting whistle blew, signaling the first round, Amaya stepped onto the first shooting platform, a Beretta 92 FS handgun, with steady steps and her gaze locked on the target. Behind the bright lights of the sponsors, behind the makeup and cameras of the press, the real undercurrent had begun to rise. No one knew that in the next few hours, at the Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club, it wouldn't just be a shooting match. It would be the beginning of an old order beginning to shake. The sharp blast of the starting whistle cut through the murmurs, the doubtful glances, and the silent scheming hidden beneath the glossy surface. First shooting station, Beretta 92 FS. Chase Whitmore stepped up first, his movements swift and confident, as if the stage had been set solely for him. The bright lights of the shooting range reflected off his titanium-framed sunglasses, making him look like a professional athlete stepping out from the cover of a prestigious sports magazine. He held the Beretta with both hands in textbook form, legs spread in perfect stance, arms extending the gun straight ahead like a dance he had practiced thousands of times before a mirror. His first 3 shots, consecutive bullseyes. The crowd erupted in cheers. Some rushed to the safety barriers to snap photos. The sponsors nodded in satisfaction. Chase tossed a half smile to the crowd, a smile that had appeared on countless billboards. He walked past Amaya on his way back, his eyes flashing with challenge. "Watch and learn, sweetheart." Amaya didn't respond. She stepped up to her station as smoothly as water flowing over rocks, silently but unstoppable. As she picked up the Beretta, she immediately felt the difference. The trigger was heavier than standard, a subtle trick, hidden beneath the flawless exterior of the weapon. She adjusted her breath, gripping the gun tighter to increase pressure, refusing to let herself falter, even for a single heartbeat. The first shot, bullseye. The second shot, just shy of the bullseye, a few millimeters off. The third shot, bullseye, no fanfare, no unnecessary movements, just cold precision, saving every action, the mark of a shooter forged in real combat, not in flashy competitions. Second shooting station, Colt 1911 large caliber handgun. Chase stepped up again, confident as if victory was already in his hands. He spun the gun in a circle before taking position, a display of skill that made the crowd gasp in admiration. His shots rang out sharply, his right hand firm, left hand steadying the grip, each recoil of the gun controlled with the finesse honed over years of competition. The result, 3 shots, 2 bullseyes, 1 slightly off but still inside the inner ring. The applause grew louder. Amaya followed immediately after, no theatrics, no flash. When she took the Colt 1911, she instantly noticed. The hammer weight had been slightly increased, making the trigger pull slower by half a second. Just enough to throw off anyone used to the standard rhythm. Amaya wasn't in a hurry. She tightened her grip, lowered her center of gravity, and relaxed her shoulders. She breathed in deeply, exhaled halfway, squeezed the trigger, with the slower half-second rhythm, just as Nathaniel had taught her in the final exercises. 3 shots in succession, 2 bullseyes, 1 barely grazing the edge of the inner ring. The gap between her and Chase after 2 stations, negligible. Third shooting station, custom, Sig Sauer P226 handgun. Chase was in his element here. The P226 was the gun he had used in international competitions. His wrist moved like a dancer, his shots quick as lightning, each bullet striking precisely as if it had been programmed. 3 bullseyes. The crowd roared, applauding, like waves crashing against the shooting range wall. Jessica Monroe, sitting in the VIP section, smiled brightly, showing off her shimmering designer dress under the lights. Chase glanced back at Amaya, flashing her a victorious smirk. But Amaya merely lowered her head slightly, adjusting her cap, and then walked straight to her shooting station. When she took the Sig Sauer, she immediately felt the sight had shifted half a degree, enough to move the target outside the bullseye if the shooter didn't compensate with the naked eye. Amaya took a long aim, not trusting the sight, but her own instinct for adjustments that Nathaniel had honed in her. The first shot, bullseye. The second shot, bullseye. The third shot, barely off the bullseye, the mark just the width of a coin. Some of the audience started sitting up straighter, eyes filled with doubt. No one could ignore a truth that was slowly coming to light. Amaya Lewis, the simple black girl in the plain shirt, wasn't just keeping up with Chase. She was truly challenging his throne. At the next stations, the difference in their styles became even clearer. Chase shot like an artist. Fluid movements, impressive tricks, making every shot look like an art form. He knew how to make every trigger pull a performance. But after each shot, the subtle adjustments to the weapon started to erode his stability, like small cracks that weren't visible to the naked eye. Amaya fought like a soldier, conserving every movement, adjusting to each natural reaction, reading the weight of the trigger, the deviation of the barrel, feeling the wind direction, adjusting her stance for each weapon without hesitation. She shot with a calmness that was almost terrifying, the perseverance of someone who knew that even the slightest misstep could cost her everything. At the sixth station, when using the Mossberg 590 shotgun, with the weight of the stock increased, Chase missed his first shot, the bullet veering nearly 5 inches off target. It was his first miss of the day. A soft "oh" rippled through the stands like the first crack in the wall of arrogance. As for Amaya, she calmly reloaded, lowered her body to absorb the recoil, and fired 3 shots in quick succession, all hitting the highest point possible. By the time half the competition had passed, the score between Chase and Amaya was now only a hair's breadth apart. And anyone watching, from the sponsors, reporters, to the wealthy guests in their expensive suits sitting in the special seats, began to realize an undeniable truth. The silent storm named Amaya Lewis was on its way, and if Chase Whitmore didn't do something other than these flashy tricks, he would be swept away. Inside Chase, for the first time in many years, fear began to stir, a feeling he thought he had long since discarded, now rising, cold and relentless, like a shadow lurking in a nightmare. As the 9th shooting station came to an end, the entire competition area felt as though it was stretched to its absolute limit, like a taut guitar string, waiting for the slightest touch to snap into a deafening sound. Chase Whitmore let the final handgun fall onto the stand, his face tight with pressure. His white polo shirt had darkened with sweat along his spine, though he tried to maintain his usual composed appearance. In his eyes, the unease was now impossible to conceal. Each step he took sounded heavy against the wooden floor, losing the airy, arrogant stride he had at the beginning. The temporary score. Chase was leading Amaya by a tiny margin, only 2 points, a distance far too fragile for such a brutal confrontation. Everything would be decided at the 10th station, the final station, and the toughest, using the McMillan TAC 338, a large-caliber sniper rifle famous for its demanding technique and physical requirements. With its strong recoil, high accuracy, but extreme sensitivity to environmental factors like wind, humidity, and temperature, the TAC 338 was not for those lacking in deep, real-world experience. A small mistake in breathing, stance, or even a slight adjustment of the scope could send the bullet off by several centimeters over a few hundred meters. The air in the shooting range suddenly felt dense, as if everyone collectively held their breath. Chase was called first. He stepped into the shooting position with the face of a man betting everything he had. The McMillan TAC 338, his home ground, the rifle he had promoted for many sponsors, the one he flaunted as the ultimate symbol of skill. This was where he believed he would decisively crush Amaya Lewis, reclaiming the absolute dominance he had built over the past decade. Chase lay down on the shooting mat, expertly adjusting the rifle. His movements were smooth and professional, like an Olympic athlete accustomed to performing before thousands of eyes. Each shot rang out, clean, sharp. Chase adjusted quickly, shooting in rhythm with his breath, controlling the trajectory with high precision. When he finished his series of 10 shots, the electronic scoreboard lit up. 9 shots in the bullseye, 1 shot barely grazing the edge within half an inch. Almost a perfect score. The entire Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club erupted in thunderous applause. Chase's loyal fans cheered nonstop, while the sponsors breathed a sigh of relief. Chase stood up, casting a cold glance at Amaya as if silently declaring, "You can't beat me." Amaya stepped up to the shooting platform, her baseball cap pulled low to shield half her face. As she took the McMillan TAC 338 from the referee's hands, she immediately sensed the difference. The scope, slightly misaligned. The stock adjusted, throwing the recoil off its usual trajectory. All of Chase's efforts from the past days were laid out before her in every millimeter of difference. Anyone unprepared, without the sharpness honed in life-or-death drills, would easily make mistakes here. But Amaya simply closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and relaxed. In that moment, she no longer stood on the Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club range. She was back on the windswept training ground on the outskirts of Virginia Beach. Next to her was Nathaniel, her late husband, whispering in his deep voice, "When everything is against you, when the equipment betrays you, when the world wants you to fail, trust in yourself, trust in your breath, trust in your hands, trust in what you've lived through." Amaya opened her eyes. From her jacket pocket, she pulled out a small folded piece of paper, the wind adjustment and scope correction formulas that Nathaniel had written down. No one stopped her. No one dared speak. Because in that moment, even the silence could feel it. She wasn't just shooting. She was keeping a promise to a soul that had passed on. Amaya lay down, pressing her cheek against the rifle stock. Each movement, each breath was adjusted perfectly, like a silent piece of music. She used Nathaniel's formula to recalibrate the aim, compensating for the misalignment. She adjusted the recoil by changing her shoulder placement, ensuring the bullet's trajectory remained as stable as possible. First shot, bullseye. No sound came from the crowd. Second shot, bullseye. Sweat began to bead on Chase's forehead as he stood, arms crossed, staring intently. Third shot, bullseye. Fourth shot, bullseye. Fifth shot, bullseye. The audience began to murmur, a wave of anxiety and amazement spreading through the rows of seats. Sixth shot, bullseye. Seventh shot, bullseye. The referee's eyes tightened on the scoreboard. Eighth shot, bullseye. Ninth shot, bullseye. And then, the final shot, the deciding shot. Amaya squeezed the trigger in one perfect, relaxed breath. The gunshot echoed, ripping through the tense silence. The target sped toward the shooting platform. One bullet hole, right in the center of the bullseye. Perfect. 10 bullseyes in a row. The electronic scoreboard blazed to life, clearly displaying Amaya Lewis, 100% accuracy. Perfect score. In that moment, the silence lasted only an instant. Then the entire stadium erupted. The sound of applause, cheers, and whistles echoed throughout the Hawthorne grounds. Those who had quietly observed, the veterans sitting behind, all stood up, honoring a victory not just in technique, but a victory of will, of perseverance, of a soul unbroken. As for Chase Whitmore, he stood frozen, his face, once the symbol of invincibility, now contorted in shock, in humiliating defeat, and in the nightmare he had created for himself. He knew he had lost. Not just a shooting contest. He had lost to a will that money, fame, or dark schemes could never defeat. The cheers still echoed throughout the Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club, like waves crashing against the wall of arrogance that Chase Whitmore had built over more than a decade. And now, that wall was cracking piece by piece under the relentless pressure of the truth. Chase remained motionless at the edge of the shooting range, his face pale as ash, his eyes fixed on the electronic scoreboard flashing Amaya Lewis's name in the top spot. From a distance, Jessica Monroe awkwardly stood amidst the crowd, the flashing lights of the media constantly snapping pictures, capturing every moment of embarrassment that no one in Chase's team had managed to stop. Chase gritted his teeth, trying to swallow his humiliation, as if he were crushing it in the palm of his hand, preparing to step onto the podium to perform the minimal duty, congratulating the winner and publicly accepting defeat. But before he could take a step, Rebecca Collins, the club manager, stepped forward from the organizing team holding a silver tablet in her hand. Her voice rang out clearly through the microphone, firm and resolute, cutting through the dense air. Before we end today's competition, I have an important announcement to make to all of you. The shooting range instantly fell silent. The applause that had been lingering in the air stopped mid-clap. Rebecca glanced briefly at Chase, her gaze as sharp as a finely honed blade. A look that no longer concealed disdain. She raised the tablet high, pressing the button to display the footage on the large screen hanging above the range. The footage appeared, a security camera clip from inside Hawthorne, showing the area where the weapons were stored before the competition. In the video, a man in the club's technical support uniform sneaks toward the shooting platforms. He crouches down, quickly disassembling and adjusting scopes, tweaking triggers, and modifying other parts of various weapons. Soon after, another angle shows him whispering on the phone. The audio of the call is filtered and amplified clearly. "Don't worry, boss. I've adjusted them just as you asked. She'll never notice." That voice, though fleeting, anyone familiar with Chase Whitmore would recognize it immediately. Chase, in his expensive shooting outfit, several rows away, grinning faintly, nodding as he confirmed the call. An undeniable piece of evidence. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, like a shattered illusion. The reporters began murmuring, their pens scribbling furiously, cameras quickly capturing the distorted expression on Chase's face, now twisted with anger and panic. Rebecca lowered the tablet, facing Chase directly, as hundreds of eyes stared at him. According to Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club's rules and the laws governing sports competitions with financial stakes, technical cheating to disadvantage an opponent is a serious violation, which could result in suspension of membership, title revocation, and criminal prosecution. Her voice remained steady, each word like a cold stone thrown directly at the man who now stood before her, shattered. Chase opened his mouth, as if to argue, to blame his subordinates, to twist every little detail to save himself. But the excuses died on his tongue when he saw the unwavering coldness in the eyes of those who had once praised him. No one came to his defense. No one intervened. Only the heavy silence, an invisible trial, where justice was the silent contempt of the community he had once stood at the top of. Rebecca turned to the judging panel, nodding her head. Immediately, 2 security officers in the club's uniform stepped forward, standing on either side of Chase, not aggressively, but with an unmistakable stance, inviting him to leave the competition area. Chase stumbled back a step, his eyes wild, as though he had just received a death sentence. And then, like a ship sinking in the night, he walked off the shooting range, his face losing the usual arrogance, leaving behind whispers, searching eyes, and cameras capturing every moment of his downfall. Shortly after, an official announcement was broadcast from Hawthorne. Chase Whitmore's membership has been permanently suspended. All past titles have been temporarily revoked for investigation. A criminal investigation has been transferred to the Massachusetts judicial authorities due to involvement in cheating during a sports competition with financial stakes. The media grabbed the news like sharks sensing blood. Hero falls. Chase Whitmore, from national champion to criminal investigation. Amaya Lewis and the historic victory, toppling the false idol. Headlines across the papers were filled with the hot news. As for Amaya Lewis, she quietly walked out of the competition area, refusing all interview requests. Outside, Michael Reeves, Commander Wilson, and a group of veterans waited for her, the only ones who didn't need an explanation to understand exactly what she had just accomplished. Amaya lifted her head high under the golden sunset, casting a warm glow over the shooting range. She didn't smile. She simply placed her hand on the old notebook in her jacket pocket, where Nathaniel's notes still lay, like a heartbeat that never stopped. Today, she hadn't just won a competition. She had exposed the lies with her own honesty, defeated arrogance with humility, and proved that even in a world full of schemes and vanity, true value could still triumph. As the sunset silently descended on the Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club, casting a golden glow on the white stone columns and reflecting faintly on the shooting range now devoid of cheers and the vibrant clapping from the crowd, what was once an impenetrable sanctuary of Chase Whitmore now stood as a cold, empty space, a silent testament to an irreversible collapse. The news of the cheating scandal exploded like a bomb in the upper echelons of the sporting world. Major sponsors, who once considered Chase the face of their brand, immediately severed contracts. Television interviews were canceled. Advertising projects were ruthlessly frozen. In less than 48 hours, Chase Whitmore had plummeted from the pinnacle of glory straight into the abyss. The National Shooting Sports Committee officially revoked his competition license for life, issuing a brief statement. Organized cheating in a sporting event with financial betting stakes is a serious violation of ethics. Chase Whitmore will be banned from competing, coaching, and participating in any official shooting events within the United States. At the same time, the Massachusetts State Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation into Chase with charges of sports fraud, obstruction of justice, and violation of fair play laws in sports betting activities. If convicted, these charges could lead to prison time and fines amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Once admired and perched at the top, he was now nothing more than a shadow of himself, skulking away from cameras, walking into law offices with a defeated expression, the trace of pride that once burned brightly now extinguished. As for Amaya Lewis, immediately after her victory, she became the media's center of attention. Major news outlets, prestigious sports magazines, and national TV stations all sought to approach her. Interview invitations, book signing requests, and even advertising offers for sports weapons. But Amaya refused them all. No interviews, no book signings, no camera appearances. For her, the victory at Hawthorne wasn't a glorified end to be celebrated, but the beginning of a promise. a promise made by Nathaniel Lewis many years ago on a windy afternoon in the desolate training fields. If one day you become strong enough, don't keep this skill to yourself. Share it with those who need it most. Make it a legacy, Amaya, a living legacy. So, when all the flashlights turned toward her, Amaya chose to turn her back. A few weeks later, at a small plot of land in the southern suburbs of Boston, an old warehouse once used as a military logistics depot, a new sign was erected. Nathaniel Lewis Marksmanship Training Center, free shooting and self-defense training for veterans and their families. Just a short, simple line, but heavy with meaning. Amaya, with the quiet support of Michael Reeves and a group of Nathaniel's old veteran comrades, began restoring the land. Cleaning the warehouse, rebuilding a mock shooting range, setting up both theoretical and practical classes. No big sponsors, no massive budgets, only perseverance, loyalty, and the belief that, by training the next generation of veterans, she was keeping Nathaniel's flame burning bright. Each morning, as the first sunlight poured onto the training grounds, Amaya stood there, wearing her old shirt, holding Nathaniel's tactical notebook, teaching the veterans how to control their breath, how to read the wind, how to steady their hands under pressure, and most importantly, how to stand firm when everything around them is collapsing. The faces once marked by war, eyes that had been clouded with despair, gradually began to light up again under her patient gaze. No grand speeches, no shiny medals, just a chance, a hand extended, a road to redemption. On one late afternoon, as Amaya was packing up the shooting platforms after a training session, Michael Reeves walked over, leaning against the old warehouse column, his eyes filled with reflection. "You know," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "Nathaniel once told us that if anyone deserved to carry on his spirit, it would be you." Amaya looked up, a faint smile playing on her lips as she glanced over at the training field, where a group of veterans were laughing and joking after completing their final drill, their laughter ringing clear in the golden-hued twilight. She quietly replied, "I'm just keeping a promise that should never be forgotten." Across the city, Chase Whitmore, now a cautionary tale in sports ethics classes, had become a warning that no victory is worth it if it's earned through deceit. As for Amaya Lewis, the simple black girl who had been ignored at Hawthorne all those years ago, she had quietly built her own monument, not in concrete, not in brass, but in the souls she had touched and changed. A monument no one could tear down, a victory no one could deny, a living legacy, just as Nathaniel had once hoped. As the autumn days began to paint the trees along the southern boulevard of Boston in golden hues, the Nathaniel Lewis Marksmanship Training Center donned a new look, simple yet dignified, just like the spirit it was founded upon. The news of the center's establishment, offering free training for veterans and their families, spread throughout the military community in the area and quickly beyond, like quiet ripples that could not be stopped, not because of any grand achievements, not because of shiny trophies, but because of something much simpler. This was a place where those who had lost their way could find a new purpose for their lives. Then, a special event was held. The first event in the center's history, one that would honor not only those who excelled in marksmanship, but also those who overcame adversity with perseverance and courage. The Nathaniel Ghost Lewis Marksmanship Excellence Award was born, an award not just celebrating skill, but also resilience, responsibility, and the ability to stand firm in the face of adversity, qualities that Nathaniel Lewis embodied throughout his life of service. The ceremony took place under a clear autumn sky. There was no grand stage, no red carpet, no blinding flashes of light. Only the expansive training field, simple wooden chairs, and those who had experienced real battle. People who understood that true glory doesn't need to be flaunted. Amaya Lewis stood on a small wooden podium, behind her the symbol of the center, a simple stone plaque with Nathaniel's name engraved upon it. She wore her familiar navy blue shirt, her curly hair neatly tied behind her head. In her hand, she held the first-ever Nathaniel Scholarship Certificate. Her voice rang out, not loud but firm, weaving through the crowd like a warm breeze. Today, we do not just honor one person, one skill, or one achievement. Today, we honor the power of resilience, the ability to rise after failure, and the commitment to keep fighting, not for the spotlight but to preserve dignity, honor, and camaraderie. These are the values Nathaniel Lewis, the Ghost, lived and sacrificed for. And today we carry on that legacy. Amaya paused, her eyes briefly scanning the front rows where the veterans sat, nodding quietly, calloused hands gripping one another, eyes that had seen much now shining with renewed faith. She smiled faintly, raising the certificate high. I am proud to award the first-ever Nathaniel Ghost Lewis Excellence Award to someone who has shown outstanding skill not only in marksmanship, but in the perseverance to overcome adversity. Someone who has overcome wounds, both physical and mental, to keep moving forward and lead others to do the same. Someone deserving of being the guiding light for those still lost. A young man, a former ranger who had been severely wounded in a foreign campaign, slowly stepped up to receive the award. He walked with a prosthetic leg, but his eyes burned with an unshakable resolve. Amaya shook his hand, gripping it firmly, a silent transfer of values that couldn't be seen but could be deeply felt. The applause rang out, not loud but filled with reverence. After the ceremony, as the evening light began to stretch across the training field, Amaya stood alone in front of the stone plaque bearing Nathaniel's name. The autumn breeze tousled her hair, carrying with it the whispers of old days, the afternoon spent training in the fields, the unspoken encouragement, the quiet moments that spoke more than words ever could. She placed her hand on the cold stone, closing her eyes, and whispered, "Can you see it now, Nathaniel? Your legacy is not buried. It's alive, it's growing, it's changing the world, one person at a time." And when she opened her eyes, a single, glistening tear lingered in the corner of her eye, not from sadness but from a deep pride that made her heart feel as though it might burst. Amaya Lewis, from the simple black girl who had been ignored and dismissed at Hawthorne, had now become a symbol of resilience, humility, and victory by honor. A perfect shot had changed her destiny. A silent promise had built a living legacy. And a woman, quietly, persistently, never giving up, had proven to the world that true value doesn't need to shout. It shines silently, strongly, and eternally. From the simple black girl once ignored at the elite shooting club, Amaya Lewis had turned each shot into an undeniable declaration that resilience, integrity, and self-belief could break through every barrier of prejudice. She didn't just defeat Chase Whitmore's arrogance and deceit. She built a living legacy, continuing to inspire countless veterans and those who once thought their dreams were beyond reach. If it were you, in a world filled with challenges like the ones Amaya faced, what would you choose to fight for? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. If you enjoyed this inspiring journey, don't forget to hit like, share the video with those who need strength, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories.